So I think that's a very reasonable ask. I will say that's a little bit.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. Okay, so I cannot believe it, but we already have a question through our questions tab. Hey, everyone, I am Jen Stojkovic with sf.citi. I am going to be your host for today's conversation. This is our fifth and final conversation in our Mapping the Tech Exodus series. Mapping the Tech Exodus has been our sf.citi series that we've been doing since the beginning of the year, talking to folks from all across the country about what is going on with tech's footprint in their city. Are they seeing booms? Are they seeing busts? How is it evolving? And what is the future of office space and work and city life look like for them and the tech industry where they are? So this is going to be our final conversation today. We have an amazing speaker joining, Sarah Ortiz Shields from Austin Tech Alliance. So we are going to be talking about Austin, Texas. I don't think there's a single person out there that has not heard about what is going on in Austin right now. Certainly it was a fast growing tech hub before the pandemic, and they have been seeing a lot of changes in this past year and a bit. So before we get started with that, I am going to quickly go through our housekeeping because of course that is my job as the host today. First off, so if you want to ask a question throughout today's conversation, you can drop it down in the Q&A tab. I already see somebody has popped up with a question about sound. I hope you can hear me now, no problem. So if you have a question as we are chatting, we have today's discussion in two parts. We're going to be doing a moderated conversation where Sarah and I will be doing a back and forth discussing our two cities, and then we will get to as many questions as we can. I'm sure those of you that are joining from Austin have some questions about California. Those of you joining from California have some questions about Texas, and wherever you're joining from otherwise, it's just going to be an interesting conversation today. So reminder, the Q&A tab is open. Drop questions in at any time. Next, this is going to be recorded. Don't worry. We're going to share a lot of facts, a lot of figures, as we always do. You're going to be feverishly writing them down. If you actually have this thing known as a pen or pencil, I'll be completely honest, I spent probably 20 minutes looking for a pen in my house this morning and could not find a single one. So the good news is you will be shared a recording shortly after this has wrapped. Everything is always recorded and put up on the sf.citi YouTube. Last, if you want to talk about today's conversation, we of course encourage you to hop onto social media, and you can use the hashtag TechExodus. We will be following all kinds of different updates and sharing things as well through sf.citi. So we encourage you to use the social media hashtag TechExodus. I think that about does it for my housekeeping, but what I'd love to do before we bring up Sarah is go through a little bit about what is going on in our two cities and walk you through the state of both San Francisco and Austin. All right, let's get started there. So who is sf.citi? I assume if you have joined one of these conversations earlier in the year, you're pretty familiar with us. We are San Francisco's Tech Trade Association. But if you have not joined an sf.citi conversation before, we were founded in 2012 to really connect San Francisco's tech industry to local government, community, and all kinds of leaders working on solving local issues. We have an entire dashboard dedicated exclusively to sharing information about what is going on in San Francisco and beyond. What does it look like on the ground for the tech industry right now? And how is that footprint changing both during the pandemic and post-pandemic, as we are now luckily being able to kind of have that conversation. So if you want to read more about any of the details that we share today, you can hop over to sf.citi.org/SF-Tech-Exodus. So you can see it there on the screen. And of course, it will be shared as well. So what is going on in San Francisco and what is going on with today's state of the tech industry? At the time of writing this, we are looking at a pretty crazy office vacancy rate in the city. So 19.7, which is about the same as the .com bust. It was 3% a year ago. So 3% to almost 20% is certainly a massive change. There's also been a number of different news items that have come out in the last few weeks talking about how San Francisco is no longer the hottest office market in the country. It was for quite some time, but now we're increasingly seeing more office action happening in places like Seattle and New York. What is going on with the residents? Now, this is a question, the million-dollar question. Are people really leaving San Francisco? Well, the answer is a little bit complicated. We do know that there's almost 90,000 USPS address changes out of San Francisco last year, which is 5 times the number in 2019. And we have seen a 23% rent drop. Now, that does beg the question, is that a temporary change? So nobody really knows what that means for the future of the city as we start to turn back offices on, which you probably heard Salesforce is starting to let vaccinated employees back in, and a number of tech companies are going to be reopening with a very small group of employees in the next few weeks and months. So will we see a change of addresses back into the city? I'm not too sure, but that's one of the things that we can talk about a little bit with Sarah. 63% of tech companies plan to downsize in the Bay Area. So almost 2/3 of tech companies that we spoke to in January did say that they are interested in downsizing their footprint. 36% anticipate at least 50% of their Bay Area workforce to remain remote. Again, it still remains to be seen what that does look like as we turn San Francisco's economy and tech economy back on. But I think one thing that we can all agree with is the fact that it's going to look very different when tech comes back. The 9 to 5, Monday to Friday office seems to be going to the wayside, and in place of it is going to be more of a remote first environment where you may see folks coming into the office for perhaps 1 or 2 days a week, or potentially living away from the office and flying into more hub located offices rather than a headquarters model. Now, it's not all bad news though. 25 new Bay Area unicorns emerged in Q1 alone. So it's almost 50% of all 2021 unicorns. Including, of course, the famous IPO famous public listing that is going to be happening today, of course, or has already. I haven't had a chance to check the news, but there is a number of big companies that are still continuing to be founded and reaching unicorn status in San Francisco. So what is the state of tech in Austin? So Austin's population grew by 3% in 2020. So while we have USPS address changes amounting to almost 10% leaving San Francisco, Austin is growing, and Austin is growing quite quickly. It does rank 3rd amongst US metro areas that have lost the fewest jobs during the pandemic. And recently, Austin ranked 1st among US metro areas for commercial real estate. 154 companies announced plans to either relocate or expand in Austin. Another thing that is a little bit peculiar, though, is as we talk about Austin growing, one of the fascinating phenomenons is that they're actually seeing a rent drop of 2.4%, which, of course, as I mentioned in the last slide, San Francisco is seeing a rent drop as well. But it is fascinating that so many folks could be moving into the city, yet rents are still dropping. So the median rent of a 1-bedroom apartment is just over $1,200 right now in Austin. So as we discuss today, what the state of tech looks like in Austin and San Francisco, one thing that is clear, both hubs are really looking to come back onto the scene and really grow. And so I'm really excited to have a fascinating conversation today about how the two tech hubs are growing together and how they are growing differently. With that being said, Sarah Ortiz Shields, I would love to welcome you up on stage. All right. Hello. How are you?
Hey, I'm good.
Yeah. How are you all ready for this very wonky but fun conversation? I think everyone's been talking like Austin and SF.
Yeah, I'm ready. I hear people talking about it all the time. I'm sort of impressed at that $1,200 rent number. It threw me off because it's unbelievable to me. Well,
Okay.
I think we'll get into it, but it threw me for a moment.
Okay. So I'm gonna guess you're saying like I ain't seen a $1,200 rent in 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. We actually had there was an average rent for SF about a month ago in one of the listings that was saying like 1900, and all of us said 1900, like where are they getting these numbers? And
Yeah.
yeah, we could get into the how they calculate median and average, but we'll get into that in a sec. So I would love to quickly have you, introduce yourself and what you do with ATA, and then we can just dive right in and talk about what did things look pre-pandemic like in Austin and the tech industry.
Yeah, sure. Hey, everybody, I'm Sarah Ortiz Shields. I run Austin Tech Alliance. Austin Tech Alliance is a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for civic engagement in Austin's tech community. So we do this through events similar to this one. I do a lot of civic engagement, so registering people to vote in Texas. When you arrive in Texas, you must register to vote either through a paper form or with a person. We do not have online voter registration here. So
Really?
yeah, it's a little bit, it's backwards. It's something that we're working on right now. So I do a lot of just like talking about why, as a new resident or somebody who's moved here or somebody involved in the tech scene, why politics should matter to you and why you should care and why you should get involved.
Awesome. Okay, so I would love to get into this
Yeah.
if we have time later. We will see. But before Sarah talks a little bit about what tech looked like pre-pandemic, so let's say like before March 2020, the before times as we call them, just going to remind everybody, if you have a question throughout today's conversation, as Sarah and I chat back and forth, drop it in the Q&A. We will get to as many as possible. All right? Okay, Sarah, we'll hand the floor back to you.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned this, but pre-pandemic, Austin was already a really desirable place to live, and we were already the tech hub of Texas. We have the most local venture capital, and we have, and we attract the most VC too. We also have 3 or 4 universities that feed our tech talent. And one of those universities is home to the Austin Technology Incubator, which is the longest standing incubator in the country and had an economic impact of over $3 billion in Texas. So people move here because they read about it. We're on every single top 10 list because they see a better future, they want to get a job, they want to create their own job. And we have, we have a strong business community here. So Dell, National Instruments, Whole Foods. That's what we were used to hearing, 5 years ago. And now it's like Apple, Facebook, Google, Oracle, Microsoft, Tesla. And then our homegrown heroes, Bumble, Silicon Labs. These are all massive tech companies that have sort of, come out of the woodwork and have established here. One of the downsides is sort of, we're growing at a really rapid pace. We have rising costs. We have displacement, gentrification, persons experiencing homelessness, all the things that San Francisco has gone through and is still going through. So that's something that, something that we're going to work on tackling.
So you obviously have a historical background by having some of those like big tech mainstays, which of course is instrumental to why we have Silicon Valley as it exists today. Was it really seen as, and let's continue into the before times, was it seen as the next Silicon Valley back then?
I don't think so. I mean, when you talk to people, they said, oh, Austin, we see it sort of like as a tier 2 city. Tier 2 city, we're bringing in VC, we're bringing in businesses, but it's really, I think, been in the past 6 years, I'll say, that we've really started to hear more of the, Silicon Hills. When I first heard that, I was like, what is that? Who came up with that? And a lot of businesses have come here, have relocated here, and people have relocated here.
It's so funny how people feel about the Silicon this or that. Our last conversation, for those that joined with Maria from Refresh Miami, you know what they were trying to call Miami? Silicon Swamp.
No, it's terrible. Silicon Beach. They should call it Silicon Beach.
Well, that's Santa Monica. That one's already taken.
Oh,
We're
whoops.
running,
Okay.
we're running out. I wouldn't say Silicon Hills is not what I would have thought of Austin.
Austin is very hilly. You know, we're called hill country. So
Okay, fair enough.
yeah.
More of a hill than the Russian Hill I was at in SF. I mean, having to walk up that hill on the way home from the office every day, it's a burner.
They're small.
Yeah, okay. Well, then going forward, now that let's talk about the pandemic and how it's affected Austin. So you've welcomed, I want to get this number correct, 47,000 new residents. So more than any year in the past decade. So it's really fascinating. We've got this phenomenon of everybody's leaving the city. Everyone wants to go rural. Everybody doesn't want to be, cooped up in a city during the pandemic. Certainly that's something we saw in San Francisco, certainly New York. I mean, New York had a massive exodus as well. Yet you're seeing people coming into the city, which, by all definitions, it is still a city. So it's interesting that folks during a pandemic were coming into a city, and you had a record 22,114 new jobs that expanded last year in Austin. What on earth happened to make people move into a city during a pandemic? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so I think that 47,000 number is really impressive, but you have to sort of take a step back and look at it. So pre-pandemic, we were already welcoming over 40,000 people a year, which is about 120 people a day. So that context I think is really important. So we were already a really desirable place to live and people were already flocking here. So take me, for example. I came to Austin for a conference and I was like, oh, it's great here. I love it. I was here in the winter time, so it was 70 degrees. It was cheap. And I thought, oh, I'm going to move there. I was one of those 120 people that moved here sight unseen and rented my apartment online. Granted, this was 10 years ago, but still, Austin's in the news more. We're in the news for our politics. We're in the news for our allergies. We're in the news for our tacos. And so I think that people were looking at their lives in other cities and realizing that due to the pandemic, they could sort of just pack up and go wherever they wanted. You could leave. And Austin has so many benefits. I feel like the pandemic really dislodged people from places they felt stuck in, or where they thought, I wish that I could go there, but my office is in San Francisco, or I have to go into a job every day. I have to go into San Francisco every day. But now with this remote workforce, we can go wherever we want. You can go and live in your van and code during the day and travel the country. I know a handful of people that are living out of their station wagons and coding during the day and surfing at night. They're doing whatever they want. I understand that this luxury is unprecedented. So if you can tolerate 115-degree summer for 4 months, then come join us.
Oh man, I certainly think that one of the things that's really fascinating about Austin is you're kind of describing Portlandia, almost you're describing a caricature of what people thought tech was perhaps 5 or 10 years ago, but it sounds like it's actually still very much the case in Austin.
Well, I moved here because I had done some research and I knew that it would be easy for me to find a job as a person in tech. Even back then, there was advertising, there was tech, and it was growing. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be able to find a job. And I got a job in 2 months. If you hustle, you can. There's tons of opportunities here.
So certainly when we've talked to folks, the number one reason that people move to San Francisco, at least in this industry, is the career opportunities. Everybody knows that if you get that little SF or a Valley company on your resume, the sky's the limit. Do you think that Austin has that same, I don't want to say gravitas, but perhaps has that same potential to skyrocket people's careers in the way that the Bay Area traditionally has?
I think it's going to get there, and I think it's going to get there in the next couple of years. We have so much industry here now, and when I talk to people who have relocated here from Seattle or San Francisco or New York, they're the ones that are telling me how great Austin is. They're like, oh my gosh, it's so great. There's so much capital here, and there's there's office space, and I bought a house and surrounded it has a pool or whatever. So they're telling me how wonderful it is to live here. So I think that that shift is happening, and I've really seen that shift happening over the past year, and I think it's just going to continue to grow. People are just going to continue to come here and talk about how great it is.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like people are doing the economic development for you.
Yeah.
We might as well get like a shirt. Well, I'm curious, same with San Francisco. It sounds like Austin's kind of in the state that San Francisco was in perhaps 8 or 10 years ago. For many folks that are not familiar, the modern tech boom that you're seeing in SF right now, that we've been really kind of enjoying for the last decade or so, that's pretty new. Those are mostly post 2008 companies. A lot of companies that came out of the recession, obviously your Pinterests and Airbnbs and Ubers and things like that. But SF wasn't really a huge tech town with all these HQs before. And I'm curious. I mean, I imagine with a city that's literally, it wants to stay weird. A lot of people have opinions about so many newcomers coming to the city.
Well, I mean, yeah. I feel like Austin is a very welcoming and collaborative community, especially for business, entrepreneurs, VC. So that community is very tight knit. And if you move here and you post on Twitter, hey, I'm moving here, I'm going to start a business, people are going to reply to you and they're going to say, hey, let's get together, let's talk about it. And that's something that I really love about Austin, is that like sort of, small town feel in a 2 million metro area population. So people do take the time to sort of get to know each other, and they take the time to help others succeed, which I think is really important. I don't know what it's like in San Francisco. I've never lived there, but for me here, it really feels, like we want to help businesses succeed. We want other people to succeed because we want our community to continue to be vibrant and weird and have, great arts and great food and whatever.
All I can tell you is I have not lived in Austin. I've visited Austin lots, and it's a great city. And obviously, having been in San Francisco for 5 years, one thing that San Francisco has above all other places is just like an immense concentration of very talented, very bright, innovative people all in one spot. Just like an unbelievable amount of talent that just pools together in 49 square miles. And I'm curious, do you see that kind of talent pool over there? One of the things that we discussed with some others cities is that they have to pull people or keep people. They get brain drain. What's it like in Austin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same. Austin, our culture isn't rooted in tech like yours is, right? Like we didn't start out as a tech hub. So that grew. And we do have smart people, and companies really have to hustle to hire people here. I've heard stories of, offers being made that are good offers. And then, somebody will swoop in and offer literally like a double the salary, which for a
bidding war.
Yeah, because they can. And so you have to be competitive. When we, in the before times when we had offices, there was, Bumble offered blowouts every week. Like there was, you have to be competitive to what your employees want. And so it's interesting to me to think about like how are companies staying competitive now that we don't have offices and we're not going into a place. What replaced the blowout?
So what did? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that question. I think it's, maybe it's having a good life work balance. Maybe it's knowing that when you flip on your computer in the morning, you work from 9 to 5 and you have that work life balance so that you can go and you can get your blowout someplace else. But maybe it's having perks. Maybe it's having allocated time that you have to join your ERG or to do volunteerism in your community. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, it is. And it's so fascinating because there's actually a couple different countries that are looking at laws around this. Have you heard about this?
No.
So laws like turn off time essentially, where
Uh,
they are mandating that employers cannot, employ their employees to have to respond after X amount of hours. Like people get literal time off hours because if we're in this remote first environment, you're essentially an always on culture, right?
yeah,
Especially if you're on an international team.
yeah.
If you've got folks in the EU and the UK, or I mean, even Asia and Australia, they're messaging you in the middle of the night. I can imagine like that anxiety. I mean, I know for myself, it's difficult for what's supposed to be a more flexible lifestyle. It can seem like it's more intensive.
Yeah, it's really helped me I have the luxury of having a separate office. So this is my office. And when I'm in my home, I'm in my home. And when I come in here to work, I'm in here to work. But, I work with a ton of people and, they're working on their laptops in their living room or they're on their couch or their bed or wherever. I'm really grateful that I have this, but so many people don't.
Yeah. All right, so just a reminder to folks, you can drop some questions in as we're having this chat. So please feel free to drop any questions for Sarah and Ian, and we will get to them shortly. So we had the first announcement of kind of like the first tech companies starting to reopen, post-pandemic. So as folks know, Texas is kind of fully open, although Austin still is trying to have some level of COVID restrictions. But San Francisco is more than 50% vaccinated now, or more than 50% of folks have had at least one vaccine. And the governor has said here in California, June 15th, everybody, like stay masked, get vaxxed. And June 15th is going to be a new day. I'm curious, are companies open in Austin? Like are offices open yet? And what does that reopening look like?
I have not heard a lot about this happening in this year. I've been hearing,
Really?
yeah, I mean, I've been hearing that offices are planning to open either in January of 2021, and some of them are thinking about like a late fall opening, time TBD. I mean, I guess it's almost May, right? So looking at a late fall opening. So I don't really know. I mean, something that I should ask my members about.
Interesting. So we've got a lot of companies that are opening in the summer. And then as I mentioned earlier in our opening remarks, Salesforce is starting to let some, I think 10% capacity of their employees come back if vaccinated, of course. So it's moving. It's moving certainly in San Francisco. And interesting, it sounds like it might be moving even faster than Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I know for sure that the Google office here is not planning on opening until next year. So they were closed.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've been closed. I'll have to look at those numbers. I don't know. So I think this ties into we have a terrible traffic problem here. And I think
Let's hear
that
it.
I know. How dare I talk about our traffic? But we have a terrible traffic problem here. And I think the businesses are trying to keep people home as much as they can so they don't have to experience that traffic.
Interesting. So that's an interesting point because we actually had one of our transit, metro authorities in the Bay Area announced last year that they were going to, with their new plan for traffic in the area, that they were going to ask for telecommuting, a certain percentage of Bay Area companies to implement that. And that was at the time. It's so fascinating how things change. At the time when that was rolled out, business had not been consulted. And there was huge concern from all the city leaders who said, we had no idea we were asking for permanent telecommuting. Like, why did nobody reach out to us? I mean, that's going to have such a huge effect on the downtown. And since that big backlash, of course, they moved away, they stepped away from that mandate. But then everyone announced they were going remote first shortly after. So it's going to kind of like happen from the private side anyway.
I don't think telecommuting is a word that really exists here. So, Austin, we have, you always hear the sprawl. We have the sprawl here. So, I live 10 miles from downtown. I live out in the suburbs, and that is not unusual. Our county is just massive, and it's, every time they're building a new subdivision, it's that's getting even further and further outside of our city center. So, you know, I was looking at an hour to go 10 miles when I would go downtown to my working location.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty substantial.
Yeah, we did just pass a transportation bond. It's called Project Connect, but you know, it's not going to be implemented until 2040, I think 2040. So it's hard for me to conceptualize what, you know, transportation or working is even going to look like in 2040. It's like a, you know, a future movies number.
Yeah, I know. We might like have replicators by then. Who knows?
Exactly.
And you know, if the canon was right, the replicators should be kind of built in San Francisco, right?
Exactly. You think so?
You would think so. So traffic congestion, obviously we've covered that. Have you seen your downtown have, you know, kind of a huge downturn? So we've had like huge closures downtown. Like it's been boarded up in San Francisco, like a 70% sales tax drop downtown. It's a ghost town right now. And we're trying to figure out how we turn that back on, especially if offices are not going to be refilling to 100% capacity. How do we activate that space? I imagine if your offices are closed, like your downtown must look like a ghost town too.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I was down there recently, and you know, the Texas is open, so you know, we don't have a mask mandate any longer, and so people are out at restaurants and at bars, effective. I don't know when that was, at the beginning of April. So people are out, people are eating, people are drinking. I got stuck behind one of those. It's like a trolley that people bicycle on, and they drink at the same time.
I knew that's exactly what you're gonna say.
I was like, oh God, these are back. So, you know, like I feel like downtown is slowly getting back to what it was in terms of bars and restaurants and people going out. You know, they're announcing more shows now, limited capacity shows. Many of our venues here are outside, or they have an indoor outside component. You know, we're the music capital of the world, so people want to go to shows, people want to come here and perform, and it seems like that is well on its way to, you know, I don't want to call it a normal level, but whatever our new normal for capacity and events and shows is going to be. But in terms of office space, yeah, I mean, it still seems to be pretty vacant.
Vaccinations. San Francisco is one of the most vaccinated, you know, places in America. Certainly, like we're getting vaxxed. There's no doubt about it. The mayor said she's like, I will get thousands of them out a day, and she's been doing it. Is it the same in Austin?
We're getting vaxxed too. You know, we had there were some technology issues with the platform to get vaccinated at the beginning. It seems like those have mostly worked their way out. Anybody 16 and older in Texas can now get vaccinated. You don't need any sort of medical reason. You just show up and you say, here's my paperwork, and they'll vaccinate you. So that's really great. I don't know. I don't know how it's going. They did just announce that they released 12 or 13,000 appointments on Tuesday. And as of, you know, Wednesday, only 3,000 or 4,000 of those appointments were taken. So, you know, I don't know if our political climate here in Texas, you know, people are hesitant to get vaccinated, or you know, if people are just still staying inside, or if they say, oh, you know, well, I'm in a rural area, I don't need to get vaccinated quite yet because I live in Manor, or you know, Manor's not really a rural town, but if they live in a more rural town, they may not think that that it applies to them and they need to get vaccinated. But we do seem to have appointments that are available, and our vaccination numbers are going up, but maybe not as speedily as we might want.
Yeah, if there's one thing that San Franciscans did, it's they turned out for their shots, and they turned out fast. So I'm actually curious, since you brought up the political climate, I'll just dip my toes in here because this could be a massive discussion otherwise. But San Francisco and this state of California, there is a difference politically speaking. Our difference is a little bit, it's the opposite of yours. San Francisco is well, not the opposite, but I would say it's a little bit less extreme. You know, we've got obviously a very liberal population in the state of California, but it does lean more moderate. Whereas, you know, San Francisco is hyper progressive. And Austin, obviously being the liberal city it is, sitting in a state that is got a lot of Republican leadership, of course. How do you see that dynamic playing out as tech folks that move from a liberal area in California move to a place like Austin, where while Austin might be very liberal, the entire state overall could be very different than what they're used to in California?
Well, so you may have heard Austin called the blueberry and the cherry pie.
I haven't.
Yeah, that's
I
like
like that.
that's like the nickname for, you know, that I like to use for Austin. We do have our mayor is our mayor and council form of government is nonpartisan, and then but there, you know, it's a majority liberal council and mayor. You know, there does seem to be a lot of conflict over state versus local control, whether that the most recent thing on my mind is you know, our persons experiencing homelessness and camping ban. And so this has been going back between Travis County, the county that Austin sits in, and state control for years. And we actually have a ballot measure coming up on May 1st, where residents will determine whether or not to ban camping from public areas. So, you know, there is that push and that pull. I always encourage people to get involved on your local and your state level, because, you know, a lot of the things that, you know, the state is telling us to do things, and sometimes we can't control, sometimes we don't have any control over those things. And so whenever people arrive here, I always like to explain to them that you can make a difference at a state level. Local importance is very important too, but like, you can go down. Our legislative session is in session right now, and there are bills being heard about things that are going to impact you as a local resident that you could go down and testify on. So I think it's really hard. It depends on how deep you want to get into politics and how much you want to watch the fighting between the local and the state control, because you could like get your popcorn out and like spend a day.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. I mean, you could spend a day with popcorn in San Francisco. I don't know if anybody's heard, but our school board is getting a little bit of attention. So it is what it is, right? I do think it's fascinating though that, you know, you're going to have a fairly liberal, fairly engaged population of folks that are coming into the city, and they may really see this as an opportunity, because as many folks know, Texas is kind of like a non-voting state. It's not necessarily that it's that blue or that red. It's just like people aren't voting.
Yeah, and we had massive turnout in the election, in this most recent election, which we're very proud of. I personally registered over 700 people to vote, which was amazing. But we have very strict voter rules here. Well, I mentioned you have to register to vote either on paper, or you have to go in person, or you have to register with VDR. Right now happening in our legislative session, there is a really bad voter intimidation bill that is in the House. So, you know, we don't make it easy for people to vote here. And our voting numbers clearly indicate that.
Yeah. And we're now seeing what happens in Georgia with what corporates, you know, when corporate actors get involved in these types of things, there's significant repercussions.
You know, I think we have to wait and see. So if this legislation passes that's currently in the House, in our state House, we'll have to see what happens, because it was it has very similar characteristics to what was just passed in Georgia. So we'll have to see what comes out of that. You know, our legislative session runs to the end of May, so we still have some time to see how that's gonna see what's going to happen with that.
Wow.
But
All right. Well,
keeping my eye on it.
what'd you say? Sorry?
Keeping my eye on it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to keep our eye on that too. There might be a lot of people that don't have an office open with blowouts available that might have a place to show up. Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, that's a good inside scoop there. So I think that is a good pivot for us to jump into the many audience questions that we've received both ahead of time as well as popping in into the chat here today. So here's a good one that was submitted. What is the expected impact on the local real estate markets or schools in Austin with this influx of new folks?
You know, I can't speak to schools because I don't have children, and it's just not something that I actively track. So I defer that part. But for housing, you know, it's really hard. We are struggling with housing production here. So our houses are cheaper than they might be there. The average home price is between $500,000 and $700,000, but there are no homes to sell. So new construction that is being built right now is already sold through 2021. And new construction neighborhoods, new subdivisions that are being built right now have a 300+ person wait list for a single lot to come up to sale. So we might build more, and we might have a strong market value, and we might be considered relatively affordable if you think that $700,000 is affordable, but it doesn't mean that we have a healthy market, you know. I like to say that Austin is a market of well-qualified buyers that can't buy a house, you know. If you're moving, if you're moving to Austin, you need 20 to 30% down to play. So that might be fine for other people, you know, but when I think about how when I bought my house, you know, I wouldn't have been able to play with that. And that brings up a whole nother issue. So like, there's this entire category of home buyers in Austin that have just been eliminated from buying. People that were using HUD or land grants to buy their home. First-time home buyers that were putting down I can't remember what it was, 3.5% or 5%. I do not think that those people are going to be successful in finding a home. And I don't know if, you know, when you're meeting with a realtor, when you arrive in Austin, you say, hey, I want to buy a house. If you're going to meet with your realtor and you're going to say, hey, I have 5% of it down, I'm not sure you're going to find a realtor to meet with.
Yeah, absolutely. So and we're seeing, I mean, we're seeing that everywhere. In San Francisco, one of the things that's so fascinating is rents are dropping, sure, but the housing market is booming. San Francisco's housing market is booming. The Bay Area's housing market is booming. There was a funny story that came out in the summer that literally South Lake Tahoe had no homes. There was 0 listings available because every single thing got bought.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same here. You're lucky if there's like 5 homes on the market and they sell instantaneously. So I don't know how anybody buys a home here. Yeah, it's really, yeah.
I know, home ownership. And it's so fascinating because as we talk to other folks in other cities, we talked about, you know, what's the median rent? I asked Brian over in Nashville. Brian didn't even know it because he said everybody just buys a house here in Nashville. I don't even know, you know, renting is not as big of a deal. And so that is going to be, I think, one of the competitive advantages of some of these non-Austin and non-SF cities, non-SF places, because home ownership is becoming increasingly a myth.
I mean, in Austin, it also depends on where you want to live because, you know, we have all this sprawl. So our area is really large. So our downtown area, if that's where you want to live, you want to be near the bars and the restaurants and the venues and the music and the bicycle beers, you know, you're going to pay more to have that. But if you're looking to buy a home and you don't mind being in the Austin metropolitan area and you want to get on that waiting list to buy a home for 2022 and not spend, you know, $250,000, then that's probably, you know, that's great for you. But you're going to be an hour outside of town. You're going to be 45 minutes to an hour outside of town. And I know a lot of people that have relocated out into, the suburbs or small towns outside of Austin, and they really love it because they don't have to go to work. They've set up their home in sort of this hill country, and they don't ever come into town because
Yep.
they don't need to, and that they're living their best life. But if you want to experience those things, and you're going to have to come into our downtown area every day, it's just gonna be a lot of travel time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the same thing with us in SF. And we'll jump off this housing question in a second, folks. I see so many questions coming through, so we'll get to them. But, Sacramento is just like totally booming right now because so
Yeah.
many people from SF moved to Sacramento and places like that. And it'll be interesting to see as we turn offices back on, so to speak, how those people manage that. Is it just like a once a week, maybe they commute in? And it really kind of like sends me back to like a 50s, like Mad Men style, like, we live up in Albany and we give like the husband's got a place down in New York that he uses from Monday to Friday kind of thing. So it'll be fascinating to see if those types of things come up. All right, let's get to more questions.
Yeah.
So first off, Luke is asking, is there an exodus of people from California to Texas within the tech industry? So I can tell you, first off, the number one place for people to move outside of SF was other parts of California. So they did the top 20 places that people moved outside of SF, and it was, 19 of them were within California. But of course, the number one state that Californians move out of to somewhere else is Texas. I don't believe we have information specifically on tech workers, but Sarah, maybe you do.
I don't know that offhand.
Yeah, there's definitely information on residents that are changing, but I don't know that anyone has done it per industry. So I think we could also, as we get a little bit past this weird pandemic, kind of like partial pandemic that we're in, you might see some private companies like announce, here's the increase to like this hub, or like this amount of employees have moved to this hub or something like that. But as of right now, obviously that data is private.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that Oracle and Tesla are going to want to share that data when they get it because it's going to be massive. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, one of the concerns that we have is that so many people moved around the Bay Area to places that are designated fire areas. And as we get, well, that's the thing. So many places outside of San Francisco and in the Bay Area are increasingly succumbing to wildfires on a yearly basis. And as we get ready for wildfire season, that's going to start midway through the summer again, there's a very real concern that a lot of people might be in very dangerous areas.
Yeah.
All right, so speaking of suburbs, let's take it outside of the Bay Area suburbs to Austin suburbs. Are there any specific areas in the city or suburbs around Austin where tech companies are popping up, maybe other than the usual spots?
There's a, I don't know if it's a suburb, Austin people would probably skewer me for this, but we have UT San Marcos, which is in a town called San Marcos, and it is not in the Austin metropolitan area, but they're offering great tax incentives towards businesses that want to relocate there. I don't know how far away it is. It's like 45 an hour away, but it's not part of our metro area. To the north, there is Round Rock and Pflugerville, and that's where the new Apple campus is. So the new Apple campus is actually not in Travis County, but in Williamson County, Wilco. And so you do see businesses expanding mostly to the north of Austin, because that's where there's more room up there. There's more room for growth up there because it's just, it's like, it's land.
Yeah, like literally you can develop, like it's a blank slate.
Yeah, the new Tesla factory or whatever it's called, it's going to be out east, which is new for us because there's not a lot of industry out there. There's not much others. There's like not even really a grocery store. So it'll be exciting to see after they build that, what that neighborhood looks like in 5 years, 3 years.
Yeah, it'll just be like a big Tesla factory. It'll be like a Joe Rogan's theater.
Yeah, it could really become, there's going to be so many people working there, it could really become its own town.
Yeah. Well, and that's so much of what, when you look at Silicon Valley, which is not a real place you can find on a map, it's just so many little towns that dot it, that have like some mega campus in them,
Yeah.
right? Because the laws that govern where the Google HQ is versus the Apple and so on and so forth, those are all different towns. Those are all different cities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to probably create tax wars, which will be interesting to see. All right, so let's talk Dallas. Just a real quick question from Lawrence. Dallas, is there a tech ecosystem going on there?
I know very little about Dallas. I'm gonna say yes. If you're interested in learning more about, Dallas and Houston, Texas has something called I think it's called the Texas Manifesto. And it's like the Texas Startup Manifesto. And so that Startup Manifesto, if you were to Google that, has a ton of information about the Dallas startup business VC scene. It's really the extent of my knowledge about Dallas.
Okay, fair enough. Very different places. It's like if you ask me about LA's tech scene, I'm like, it exists.
Yeah,
Don't know much about it. Yeah.
it exists. Yeah.
We're such loyalists. I love it. Okay. So here's a question that I'll put my thoughts in and then you can put yours. When considering where to have an HQ for an early stage startup, should we look at Austin or SF? So I'll tell you, for SF standpoint, if you're talking about literally building, an HQ, we have massive office vacancies right now, almost 20%, and it's really become a renter's market. So we've talked to a lot of companies, and I've seen people offered some really, really great leases right now. If you literally are looking to get an office footprint in San Francisco, that was one of the things that we've actually talked about with the chief economist, is that yes, there's going to be a lot of companies that leave the city, and we know there very publicly was a lot of companies that have left the city, but that does mean that more startups can move into the city at a cheaper rate. So what might have been completely unattainable and was a bidding war a year ago could suddenly look a lot more available to you as a startup. So I would just plug now as being a good time to look at office space. But Sarah, of course, you gotta cheerlead for your city. So what are you gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we have office space that is available too. I think the good thing about Austin is that since we are a smaller scene, if you're looking to, if you're looking to meet or talk, or you're looking for investors, it is sort of a close-knit community of that here. Also, Austin is a very young city. Like the people here are very youthful, and they're always looking for like the newest thing, right? So we have South by Southwest, which resumed this year in a digital capacity. And before times we had 2 annual startup crawls. We have the startup games. So this community is very, that's very close, and so I feel like you would be welcomed here with, a warm embrace and a taco, like when you cross the city lines. So sure, come here, email me, and I will introduce you to people.
Okay. Well, Sarah, I think that's when you drop your email in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Come on, you got to sell here. Well, we might not have a taco, but we'll probably have a burrito when you get to SF. So. Okay, last question I'm going to ask, and I think this is a great one to wrap up today's conversation. What distinctions of strengths and weaknesses might SF and ATX find in working more closely together as sister cities? Appreciating realistically, what they are, leading the way in US innovation and entrepreneurship, and mapping the exodus. How can we better collaborate?
Well, we do collaborate right now. So Jen and I, we meet monthly-ish to talk about things that are affecting civics and tech and politics at sort of a federal level. But I think that we could stand to learn from what y'all are doing. We could just stand to learn from what y'all are doing and how you've reflected upon what went poorly, especially like with your person's experiencing homelessness. That's a big issue for us right now, and we could learn from that. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, certainly, I think that we kind of are a little bit farther down the timeline than y'all, right? So you can take a look at, here's policies that worked in SF, here's policies that didn't. We are similar population size as well. San Francisco is less than 900,000 people. We're the little city with a big name. So let's not forget that. Everybody knows San Francisco, but we are still relatively quite small compared to other cities. So we are more closely aligned, I think, in terms of the size and structure. I think that one thing that's really interesting is we talk about this remote first world and what's it going to look like for offices. And there's going to be a huge push to decentralizing and creating more hubs for offices. I think the day of the old day of big HQ, like big mothership, that's going to the wayside. Obviously, the Oracle and Tesla argument is kind of, I think it's more philosophical of like kind of trying to say like screw you to California, but those HQs, I don't think you're going to see a lot of those in the future. And this is going to be something we have to tackle as cities. How are we going to have more hubs and maintain those hubs? And if you have hubs, that means that you're not just a San Francisco company anymore. You're not just an Austin company anymore. You're probably spread all over. Jack Dorsey announced Ghana as the next Twitter hub just this week. So as we think about it, maybe we think about what can our ecosystems do to really have strengths, like what can we be known for? One of the things that New York talked about was like sales and marketing, like really flourishes in New York. So rather than fighting for HQs, maybe we can hone in on like industries and skills and the kinds of talent that we can really be known for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been an interesting last hour. We had a lot of folks a lot of you have been on this entire time. So thank you so much for watching the two of us for your lunch hour or your coffee break in the afternoon, wherever you are joining from. This is recorded, so you can reshare out and watch this entire discussion later and share it to all of your friends that are thinking about, should I move to Austin? Should I move back to San Francisco? California versus Texas, what's going on? Is there anything that you would like to say? And final remarks, Sarah?
I mean, if anybody is thinking about moving here, please reach out to me, austintech.org, Sarah with an H, SARAH, at austintech.org. I'm happy to register you to vote, and I'm happy to connect you to whoever I can connect you to, and just welcome you here and see how we can work together. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. And that concludes today's discussion. I will see everybody again soon. Thanks, everyone.